There it is. Technology. Well, good morning. Y'all come on in. Hope everybody's doing well. Today we're going to be in Acts 27, verses 1 through 12. But before we get started, let's go to our Father in prayer. Dear Lord, we love you. We thank you so much for being the God that is everything to us. The God who heals us, who gives us hope, who puts the things and the people in our lives that need to be there. The God who is willing to give his own son for us. I pray that we remember what you've done for us in everything that we do. Be with those that can't be here today. Be with those that are sick. Heal them. Be with those that have fallen away. Bring them back to you. And let us grow closer to you every day. We thank you for all you've done. In Christ's name, amen. How many people in here like storms? Anyone? There's one. Anyone else? How many people like storms? I like you more and more every day. When I was a kid, I used to we lived by the church in Bentonville, and we had these folding chairs, and I would go grab a folding chair and run out to the parking lot in the church, and I'd sit there and watch the storms come over. Lightning's hitting, and I was crazy, and then my mother saw me, and she'd, "David Wade, get in here," screaming at me. But I loved storms. I still love storms, but I wanted to be a storm chaser for a while. I really loved the idea of chasing after tornadoes and seeing if I could see them and all that. And then I met Robin, and she put a stop to that really quick. But my boys like storms. The other night when that tornado warning hit Benton County, I get home from work, and the back door is propped open, sliding door is wide open, and Jonah has his lawn chair just sitting there at the edge of the door because Robin wouldn't let him go outside. But he was sitting there just watching the storm as it blew through. Now, since me and you are the only people that like storms, do you enjoy traveling in a storm? You like traveling. Okay. Well, I've had some experiences that I don't enjoy traveling in a storm. Robin and I went on a vacation one time down to Corpus Christi. We wanted to go to North Padre. We like to fish on the beach. And we drove all the way down there. We bought our little fishing license and all the gear, and we were getting ready, and everything started shutting down. Turns out a tropical storm was heading that way. We also got news that evening that one of Robin's good friends from work had been killed in a car wreck, so we needed to make our way back. We looked at the weather forecast. It said the tropical storm would not come in until that next afternoon, so we were like, okay, it's already 8, 9 at night. We're just going to stay in our hotel room. We're going to get up the next morning. We're going to drive back. We woke up the next morning about 6 o'clock, 6:30, and the storm had already hit. It had sped up overnight, but we still had to get back because Robin wanted to be there to help with the funeral arrangements and things like that. So we got in the car and we started heading north out of Corpus Christi with all the other people. And I have never been in a situation where I was that scared driving. You could not see literally from here to there in front of the car. It was raining so hard. The winds were so strong. And it took us probably 8 hours to go what would typically take about 2 to get up toward Austin area. But it took us 8 hours. And I had cramps in my hands from holding onto the steering wheel so tight. It was terrifying until we got out of that. Well, we're going to be talking about a storm that Paul was in. And I can only imagine, because I was in a car, I had what I would call some control over the situation. I can't imagine being in a boat during a storm like that and trying to navigate that and go a certain direction. And that would just terrify me. I would not like storms after that, I think. But that's where we're going to be. That's what Paul was dealing with heading toward Rome. So I was talking to somebody beforehand about this, and I said, I'm touching on Acts 27, 1 through 12. And he knew the story very well. He goes, oh yeah, the snake bite, and you got all the cool stuff. And he started naming off all the stuff. I go, no, I'm just the first part of the travels. That's 1 through 12. But when I'm looking at it, there's some really cool stuff in this first 12 verses that kind of sets the stage for what's going to happen next. So why, again, is Paul heading to Rome? To have his day before Caesar. So the build-up to this has been, 2.5 years coming? The build-up to this trip. You had Felix, who held on to him for 2 years as a prisoner. You had Festus, who could have let him go, but didn't. So he appeared in court, or not really court, but just a question session. And, he ended up appealing to Caesar. So now they are required, because he's a Roman citizen, to send him to Rome to appear. So it's been 2.5 years getting to this point. And back in Acts 23:11, I believe it is, Jesus appeared to Paul at night during his imprisonment in Jerusalem. He had a vision of Jesus coming and saying, you will speak with Caesar. So it's been a long time coming, but this is what is set up. So back in these times, there were obviously a lot of ships. That's how they traveled here. So they had set up a plan to get him along with other prisoners, and this is where we start. So Acts 27:1. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to the centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. We boarded a ship from Adramyttium, about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. What do we know about Julius? He's a centurion. Do we know anything? He was part of an imperial regiment. We know that from the scripture. that is typically, the way it was worded, is one of the more important regiments. He was the top, the head of that particular regiment. Typically, a regiment would be about 600 soldiers that he was over. So he was an important military person. So evidently, Paul was considered very important, or the prisoners, it was very important to manage the prisoners that were with Paul. The word other that was described here, it says Paul and some other prisoners. Kind of want to read to you what it says about the word other that was used. Paul was among other prisoners. The word for other is heteros, which usually means others of a different kind. The difference may have been Paul was a Christian, whereas the others weren't. The difference may have been that they were already condemned men who were being sent to fight in the arena. I think that's kind of important in that as we go through these, Paul gives a lot of advice. How often do you see a prisoner giving advice to a centurion and telling them how they should do things? It's not often. So that's kind of an important distinction between Paul and the other prisoners. The next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so they might provide for his needs. So what kind of needs are they talking about here? I don't know the answer. Provide for Paul's needs. He's only been on the ship for one day, for 24 hours. Any ideas? Future rations? Why didn't he stock up before he left? He didn't have his friends there, okay. But Luke was with him.
Maybe it was something showing that Julius favored him a little bit.
Okay.
Giving him some freedom.
Mm-hmm. Any other ideas? Okay. If it was me on a ship, I'd probably need some seasickness pills personally. Maybe he was sick. There you go. Yeah, there was a doctor. Why was Luke on the ship? Because Paul was there? Would the people on the ship like that Luke was there? I would think so, having a doctor with you aboard a ship. Who was the other gentleman that they mentioned? What was he traveling with Paul for? He'd been with Paul for a while. He had traveled to Jerusalem with Paul. He's not talked about much, but from the commentaries that I read, he was a person that was traveling with Paul with the money that he was taking to Jerusalem. So he had been with Paul for a while. Now, we don't know why he's traveling back with Paul as Paul's a prisoner. Some suggested that Luke and, I can't say his name very well, Artemis or Some have suggested that they were considered as could have been considered as Paul's slaves, if you will, his servants. So they, although Paul was a prisoner, they were allowed to travel with him. Some suggested that he was going back toward home, so he purchased a ticket to travel with them. Some say that Luke was just allowed to be on board just because he was a doctor. We don't know for sure. But we do know that Paul was not alone on this boat, this ship. In fact, there were 276 passengers aboard this ship. So it's not a little dolly out the back. It's a large ship.
Amazing they all survived.
We're not there yet. She's reading ahead. That's not fair. I don't even get to that yet. That's somebody else's lesson. Okay, verse 4. From there we put out to sea again and passed to the lee of Cyprus, because the winds were against us. When we had sailed across the open sea off the coast of Sicilia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. So, anybody know anything about Myra? Myra is a port town that is considered to be one of the main links, if you will, for grain, produce, things that need to travel to Rome. From what we could tell, this is one of the main ports. And Rome basically owned the shipping industry, if you will, at the time. So all of these ships were probably part of this exchange of produce and grains and things like that. The ship that they were put on was probably a normal route, back and forth, moving produce back and forth. So it was not considered unusual for Roman prisoners, Roman guards to be on these ships, because this is a normal transportation route. The ship itself was likely had many, many tons of grain on it. It could hold a lot of people, a lot of produce. This was just part of a fleet. And so when they got to this town, this particular town, this was where they were heading to find the next ship to go to where they needed to be. It was known before they ever got there that they would find a ship that they needed to be on to head toward Rome. So verse 6, there the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us aboard. We made slow headway for many days and had difficulty arriving off Cnidus. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete, opposite Salmone. We moved across the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens near the town of Lycia. Sorry, I butcher these names. They don't just roll off the tongue. So they set out in the grain ship. They're having trouble. Do you know what the leeward side of Crete is? The leeward is the side of the island that is protected from the winds. It's the leeward side, so the winds come down. It's easier to sail on that side than it is on the other side where the winds are. So they are having a hard time getting this ship where it needs to be. The winds are very strong. And they come to a place called Fair Havens. Now, Fair Havens, from what I read, is a small bay. It's not very well protected. A lot of these larger bays, larger ports, are protected on 3 sides. This one is not. And it says it is near the town of Lycia. Lycia is a very small town, and it's actually about a 2 hours hike from Fair Havens. So imagine the closest contact is about 2 hours from where you're at to get food, supplies, anything like that that you might need. It's a 2 hours trek to get to it. What time of year were they sailing? First part of October, that is correct. That's when the winds start. So September through November, it's considered in the Mediterranean, the shipping is considered hazardous. After November, I think it's 11th, or I'm not sure about that part, but till like around March 11th, ships don't sail. So there's about a month and a half from September through November that it's very, very dangerous, but you can still make your way. But after that, you don't move. So they're about to have to make a decision. Much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because now it was after the Day of Atonement. So Paul warned them, "Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be dangerous and bring great loss to the ship and cargo and to our own lives also." But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete facing both southwest and northwest. So here you are in a harbor. Winter's rolling in. Storms are really bad. You have to make a decision. Phoenix is about a 40-mile trek to get there on the water. You either stay there and take your 276 people and go visit Lycia, a small town where you would have to live with them, rely on them, their stores, their hospitality for probably up to 5 months before you could sail again. It's a small town. Do we even know that they could accommodate that many? They had that choice, or they could get back in the boat and try to make it to Phoenix. Paul says, don't do it. We stay here. We need to stay here. But if you were the centurion, would you be listening to Paul? He's a prisoner. Exactly. The pilot's, he does this every day, all day long. This is his normal route. Why? Of course you're going to listen to the pilot. There's no question. But Paul did warn them. And you're going to get to hear more about what happened next week. I don't get to play with that part. But here's what I find really interesting in a lot of this. And as you read more, you'll kind of hear they start talking. Paul starts talking a lot more. He starts doing stuff. So, and they follow some of his advice and as they move forward. But why? Why Paul? Why Paul? Why does Paul, well, not really why does Paul, but why would the centurion eventually start listening to Paul? Why would the people aboard give him any attention at all? Why is he somehow special in all of this? Okay, he's educated. How did they know that? There's 276 people aboard. I mean, we know it, but some prisoner gets dragged onto a ship. You're not going to necessarily assume that he's this intelligent fella that is going to be talked about for eternity. News travels, okay. There must be, there's something going on.
Well, a little later, he speaks with authority because the angel of the Lord has spoken to him.
Mm-hmm.
He's told him everybody's going to survive.
Yeah. So, how long were they on this boat so far? Do we know exactly? We know he was the first leg, first jog before he went and got help from his friends was only a day. But the next part of the journey was supposed to take 2 to 3 days, and Luke's writing says it was much more. Some of the writers said it could have been 2 to 3 weeks it took to do that, what should have been 2 or 3 days. So they did that portion, and now they're moving on. So he's been with these people for a month at least. 3 to 4 weeks. 270-something people isn't 276 people. That's not a whole lot. You've got a lot of time to sit around and talk and chat and get to know each other. And if the people in this room sat in this room for a month together, I think we'd know each other pretty well. Long enough to take a head count. Long enough to know if you liked somebody, trusted somebody, thought they were crazy, whatever the case may be. But he spent time with these people. And it's Paul. I think we've learned, going through this for the last year and a half, that Paul doesn't isn't exactly quiet about what he believes and what his faith is. And Luke's there with him, the interaction with Luke. So they got to know him. To me, this part of this lesson, that's what hits me. If somebody spends a month with you, what is the lasting impression that you make on them? Is it, well, he's a nice guy, he's awkward, or he's good at his job, or he's whatever the case may be? Or is it, I'm going to trust what he says because this man trusts a God in a way that I can't even imagine. He was not the shy type. To me, that's an incredible not just a lesson, but makes me want to go back and redo things, you know. Is your life lived in a way? Do you talk to people in a way that they look at you and say, okay, there's something different. He shows love. He shows compassion. He loves God. He trusts God. Is that what they would remember if you spent time with them?
They would know that they've been there long enough for them to know that he really believed what he was saying.
Really believed what he was saying. Genuine.
You know, it says in the first verse there that we decided that we would celebrate all and some other prisoners. If these other prisoners were coming from Jerusalem the way Paul was, they may have known some stuff that was going on in Jerusalem and why Paul was having problems in the first place, and then they get to a place where they say, well, you know, he's got some standing, he's got some credibility. Maybe we better listen to what he has to say.
And they probably knew that he had no business being a prisoner in the first place. These others could have already been convicted. They were heading to Rome to serve their sentence. Maybe it was in the arena at the time. We don't know for sure, but they were definitely different than Paul. But like you said, they probably knew about him. They probably knew his story. So that aspect to me of this story, and unfortunately I'm not allowed to go further into the story. I wish I could, but I'll steal somebody's stuff for next week. That aspect of this part of the story really hit me hard.
You know, if you've ever been around prisons or jails, the other prisoners know why you're in there.
Yeah.
It's one of the first things they find out.
And Paul was in that particular prison for 2.5 years. Over 2 years at least. They're going to know who he is. And know what he's made of and know who he serves. And that's the most important part. Know who he serves. When people meet us, do they know who we serve? I'll admit, I struggle with that aspect because my job requires me, I oversee all the construction for a local municipality that's not street related. And I deal with architects and engineers and contractors and on a daily basis. And if you have been or familiar with that group of people. There is a lot of fighting, there's a lot of blame game, there's a lot of lying so they don't have to cover the cost of some mistake they made. It's just constant. And so my job is to get through all of that and to say, no, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to pay for this because you screwed it up. My attitude in that is not always the best. When somebody lies to my face on purpose, and that has happened numerous times, they know how I feel afterwards. Now, is that the impression I need to leave?
Yes, because you need to hold to what's right.
I need,
You're a witness.
yes, I need to hold to what's right, but I'm not sure that that's my mentality.
Can be. Because you're doing it.
Yeah.
I hold it in account.
But I want them to see Christ in that. I'm not sure that my attitude necessarily conveys Christ in that. I need to do what is right. I need to hold them accountable. I need to do those things, but it's all about your attitude in it and showing that who you serve.
But sometimes don't you have to, Paul used the phrase, when in Rome do as the Romans do. In other words, you have to
Yeah,
speak their language sometimes, but yet hold that firm,
yeah,
right line.
Yeah.
You don't let them get away with it, and in turn, they know where you stand. For right.
for right. The question becomes, what's different with Paul is he has spent so much time talking about who he serves. He can do that and not allow, those people still know who he serves, even if he's tough with them, even if he holds the line. Do I spend enough time letting people know who I serve so that my holding the line isn't me just being a total jerk? I think that's where I struggle. Do I do enough in my daily life with the people that I work with to let them know who I serve, to allow me to do the job that I'm supposed to do, and them see it as a service to God? That's what he's doing in everything that he yelled at people for, and everything that Jesus yelled at people for. And Jesus yelled at people. Jesus was not, oh, you're okay. This is how you are supposed to be. He didn't shy away from any of that. But they knew who he was because he told them who he was. I need to tell people who I serve so they understand that the reason I'm saying this is not for me, but for him. That's what I got out of this lesson for me. And that's what that's Paul. That's what Paul did on this ship. This is what Paul did all his life. He can tell people, he can get their trust, he can confront them for the wrong because they know who he serves. It's not about him. It was always about Christ. Any other comments? Well, thank you all very much.